Hi, my name is Michael Dell. I'm a Ganawage Rono living with special needs. When I was interviewed, I had an idea for a show for people from Ganawage living with disabilities. Today is the start of that show, Walk in My World. Often, people with disabilities lead sheltered lives, and their interactions are limited to caregivers and family members. I hope this show will bring you awareness of these people, their families, their lives, and their dreams for the future. Welcome back to another episode of Walk in My World. Today we are speaking to Susan and Tonya from the Alzheimer Society, Suroît. Thank you for coming to appear on an episode of Walk in My World. Today we are going to be talking a little bit about Alzheimer's disease and what encompasses it when you have that disease. So welcome Tonya and Susan, and thank you for joining me on this episode of Walk in My World.
Thank you, Michael, for having us.
So what is the mission of the Alzheimer Society, Suroît?
Well, our mission of all the Alzheimer societies is to alleviate the social and the personal consequences of Alzheimer's disease and of related dementias for people with the disease and for their families and for their caregivers.
So what's the vision of the Alzheimer Society?
Our vision ultimately is a world without Alzheimer's disease. We're not there yet, but we never give up hope that that is where we will be.
Okay, would you say that Alzheimer's Society right now is on the rise?
Well, Alzheimer's disease would be on the rise in Canada. Just to explain quickly what the Alzheimer Society is, it was founded over 30 years ago, and the Alzheimer Societies of Canada, there's about 140 throughout the country, and 20 are in Quebec. And we have a federation for the Quebec societies. And our region in the Suroît, we give services to the people of Vaudreuil-Soulanges, of the greater Chateauguay area, of Ganawage, of Beauharnois-Salaberry, and the Haut-Saint-Laurent regions. So that would be our little area. And yes, Alzheimer's disease is on the rise, and it's important for regional chapters to be able to give the services they need to give to answer the demand of the rising clientele.
So if somebody suspects that a family member has Alzheimer's disease, where is the first point of contact? Like where should they go? Should they go to the Alzheimer Society, or should they pay a visit to their family doctor first?
Yeah, they should, first of all, they should pay a visit to their family doctor to get a proper diagnosis. And in the meantime, if they suspect that it is some kind of dementia and they want some advice or some help, they can give us a call and we can give them some information on the signs and the symptoms of the disease and where they can look to for help within the health system.
Is Alzheimer's different from dementia?
Well, it's not exactly different. Alzheimer's is a form of dementia. Dementia means that you have loss of memory and that your judgment and your reasoning becomes impaired. And also we see changes in mood and behavior and difficulty with communication.
So you're not able to carry out the daily task of daily living?
That's it. Sometimes you have problems finishing tasks that you used to do all your life, such as making a meal.
Okay. And I'm sure Alzheimer's disease doesn't start off at the same point for everybody, right? It all starts off different?
It's a different journey for everybody. Okay. Because Alzheimer's disease, it's basically slowly killing cells in your brain, and it affects different parts of the brain for different people, so different abilities are lost at different times.
And it's important to remember that at the beginning stages of the disease, there is still a good quality of life. We don't lose all our capacities and all our functions immediately. So it is a longer evolution of the disease, and it has different stages.
Okay. So if people are looking to prevent Alzheimer's disease? Is it possible?
Well, to prevent, you cannot fully prevent the disease. What we can do is try to reduce some of our risk factors. So there are risk factors as related to aging, which is impossible to reduce our risk of aging. So that is one of the risk factors that exists. But there's also other risk factors that exist, such as cardiovascular problems, diabetes, other kinds of health problems that also increase the risk. And if you try to maintain a healthy lifestyle, healthy diet, some exercise, social interaction, and different kinds of activities, even dancing was found to be one of the activities that helps a lot in reducing risk somehow. And there are little things we can do to reduce our risk and not to increase our risk, but we can never eliminate all risk of getting the disease. The relative risk for someone who has, let's say, no other risk factors other than their age, at age 65, we would expect to see a relative risk of 1 in 20. At age 80, we would increase that to 1 in 4. And if you were to live to be 100, your risk would be at that point 1 in 2. But that would be one of that would not be a terrible thing when you were 100, because you would probably not see the end of the disease if you were only diagnosed when you were 100. You would still be in the early stages.
So is Alzheimer's disease hereditary?
There is a familial form. The familial form counts only for 5 to 7% of cases, and those people that we see usually are in their they're very young. They're usually sometimes under 50 or in their 50s. And that form is very hereditary. It's very genetic. There are other risk factors with heredity that increase risk. So if we have, let's say at 65, if 5 people in 100 at age 65 would have Alzheimer's disease with no parent affected, compared to someone who had one parent who had the disease, the sporadic form, the general form, which is their risk would increase maybe to 15% instead of 5% at age 65.
So at your office, like you provide all kind of services. So like information to the families, information sessions like to the public. But what if somebody from say Ganawagi around the area needs has a family member with Alzheimer's disease and they need support in the form of respite? Do you provide that?
Well, the respite services that we have are every area has their own provider of respite services. The Alzheimer Society does provide respite services in certain areas. In Ganawagi, we do not have respite services, but there are other organizations here that do provide it, and we do work with them. The kind of support that we would give here is what Susan is doing presently and developing.
Right. So we started with information sessions for the general public. Yeah. And hopefully later on we hope to set up some support groups which are partly support and partly information for families. But if somebody from here could call on our toll-free line at any time for information or advice. And if somebody needs help right away and we don't have a group set up, we do go out in the community and do family meetings and consultations.
Okay, if somebody has a family member that has Alzheimer's disease, is there a checklist that they can follow to see before they go to the doctor on their own if their family member is losing their memory a little bit, and then that will force them to go to the doctor to the next step, because some people may not want to go to the doctor right away because, oh, well, my mom only forgot this yesterday, but then it becomes a recurring problem. Mm-hmm. So is there a checklist that the caregiver can follow?
Yeah, there are certain signs. When we say memory loss, like we all forget things. Yeah. It's when you forget, say you have your car keys and you forget that they're for your car. Or if you misplace things, you're doing things like putting your keys or your wallet, say, in the fridge instead of on a table or somewhere. There are other things that you could notice, like sometimes people become apathetic and they need a jolt or a cue to get going to do something. They could start to get lost within their own community that they know very well.
And we're looking at it's not just memory loss, it's memory loss that affects daily function. If you have any doubts, it's really important to get an early diagnosis and not to be afraid of having a diagnosis, because your doctor can rule out other causes of those kinds of symptoms that Susan described. Sometimes they can be related to other things that are not Alzheimer's, that are maybe very easily treatable. So it can help a lot to get an early diagnosis. And if it is Alzheimer's, it would be nice to know at the beginning of the stage and not to be diagnosed much later in the disease when it's a little late to make plans for the future and to be involved in our care and to get the help that we need early on, and for caregivers to get that help early on.
So the earlier the better?
The earlier the
Definitely.
better. This is a big message from the Alzheimer Society.
Okay, so it's better to prevent earlier than later.
It's better to know earlier than to be worried about knowing. Some people worry about knowing and they show up at our office and we tell them how important it is to get an early diagnosis, and when they go see the doctor they find out that it's not even Alzheimer's disease, it's something else.
If it's something else, it could be
very easily treatable.
treated. But then if the caregiver does not go get help, then it could cause caregiver burnout too on that end too.
And we often see people getting diagnosis, at least 2 years into the disease.
Absolutely.
It's very, very
Yes.
common that people didn't go for at least 2 years because they didn't want to face that. And they've missed out on a lot of things that they could have done early in the disease to hopefully, get more good years.
Maybe because they were so used to being independent,
Yes, it is a hard diagnosis to receive, but part of our mission is to make sure that we can help as much as possible to help people get through their day-to-day living by giving tricks for them and by giving tricks for their caregivers to take better care of them, and to identify also the signs of caregiver burnout. A lot of caregivers don't arrive for services until they are quite burnt out, and there are signs of caregiver stress as well.
figuring, oh, I can do it.
Or just not recognizing their signs of caregiver stress. Some of the signs of caregiver stress, say Susan, are just being burnt out, being fatigued, being depressed, having the caregiver themselves can sometimes have problems in their own sleep patterns, being disturbed, withdrawing socially, being in denial of the disease and of how it's affecting them as well.
Because they have to take care of that person so much that
They care, yes,
they
of
don't take
course.
care of themselves.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes. And denial is a big part of the disease, trying to say it's normal memory loss. Sometimes it is normal memory loss, but if it's affecting everyday activities, it's probably much more than that.
So the response in Guanajuato has been good to the workshops.
It's been a lot of healthcare professionals and one or two, but maybe we didn't get it publicized quite well enough.
Yeah.
But there are ongoing plans to
Yes,
continue
absolutely.
and to make sure that the public knows what services we offer, and for us to be here and to be close to the community and to be very accessible to the community, to make it very easy for people to find the services they need. That maybe the Alzheimer Society can offer.
Is there anything else that you feel that we missed or that you want to add?
Anything else in our message? Well, we talked about early diagnosis. That's a big one. If you have any doubts, just find out. That doesn't hurt to find out, because finding out won't make it more or less real. It'll just give you hopefully the information that you need to find the tools that you need to deal with it.
And often if you're living with someone, because it's a gradual progression, you sort of think that's just the way they are, or they're just getting older. And so you really have to be looking for the specific signs.
And also just to reinforce again the message that just because someone has a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease does not mean that they can no longer be have a fulfilling quality of life, and especially in the beginning of the disease, and to remember to see people the same. We see the person. All our services are free. They're offered in English and in French throughout all the communities that are in our region of Quebec, in the Suroît region, and that's it. We hope that they're very that we are very easy to find and very easy to call on, and our philosophy is always based on a person-centered approach, on seeing the person and not the disease. And we focus very much on that, really seeing the person, the individual, not seeing the disease, but really the person behind, and to personalize the services for different individuals in different situations, so that all through the disease we can accompany them. You know, Michael, that the symbol of the Alzheimer Society is the forget-me-not flower. Yeah. And the flower represents memory loss, but it also reminds us not to forget people who have Alzheimer's disease, nor their families. And our logo has the 3 forget-me-nots on it, and the 3 forget-me-nots are the person with the disease, their caregiver, and the Alzheimer Society, hopefully being part of that accompaniment throughout the whole journey.
I know when we were talking on the phone to set this up, we were talking about metal pots.
Oh, aluminum! You were asking about aluminum, yes.
Yeah. If there was any significance between Alzheimer's and metal pots.
No, that's now said to be a total myth.
It's said to be a myth, according to the latest publishings of Alzheimer Canada.
No, I was just asking because...
Because at one time, yes, they did think it was...
They were saying that it was metal pots, and then it was Teflon.
Right.
So
there's a lot of myths out there. One of the myths is that aluminum. They were at some time we thought that aluminum might be linked to Alzheimer's disease, and it's considered a myth now.
What are the 10 myths?
Some of the other myths. Well, I'll try to remember some of them, and Susan can fill in some also. Some of the myths is that if you have Alzheimer's disease, your life is over, which is not true. The journey lasts 7 to 10 years. We sometimes see longer. 12 years is not uncommon, and there are different stages in the disease, and you have a different quality. That there's always a quality of life that can be achieved, especially in the early stage. It's important not to forget that. One of the other myths is that because one of your parents had Alzheimer's disease, that you will necessarily have Alzheimer's disease. That is also a myth.
Sorry, that's a myth?
That's a myth.
Yes.
Just because one of your parents had the disease doesn't mean that you will necessarily have it, but it does mean that you have an increased risk. Your risk has increased. There are a lot of things that increase risk.
It's like the same thing for diabetes.
Diabetes increases risk as well.
If you have the same, yeah.
We know that Alzheimer's disease affects more women than men, but not necessarily only women. Men are affected as well.
Why is that?
Mostly because women live longer, in general.
Women live longer than men, so they have more risk.
Since age is the biggest risk factor.
Uh-oh.
It's important to remember too that Alzheimer's disease is not a normal part of aging. Risk increases with age, but it's not a normal part of aging. It is a disease of the brain, and it is not a normal part of aging.
I know that people that live around here, they've worked, older people, they've worked hard all their life, and then you see them when they're going, you just go around town, you see them, they start to slow down. And I've always noticed that it's after they retire, everything happens to them. Some people.
Well, it's actually the hardest thing to see. Yeah. When somebody calls and they say they just retired and their spouse is just diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and then it means that they have to change what their plans were for their retirement. Maybe they're not going to travel as much.
Because their lifestyle changes. So it's sad.
Well, it's also the timing, because we know that we start seeing Alzheimer's typically in the sporadic form, we start seeing it at age 65, 1 in 20 people at age 65, which is very coincidentally the same age as retirement age for people who are retiring presently. So it's a sad fact that it kind of coincidentally happens at the same time.
So can you give us your your phone number and stuff like that? Because just tell the people.
Sure. Our toll-free number is 1-877-773-0303.
Okay, and that's for the Alzheimer Society. So
That's correct.
okay, and there's a website if people want to go get more information.
Our website is www.alzheimersuroît.com. And if they phone us at the toll-free number, we can help them to find the website and to help them navigate through the website. There's a wealth of information on that site.
Okay. Do you have any, on that website, do you have any personal stories from caregivers that people can go see?
I don't know on that website per se, but there might be links into other websites
Right. For sure, Alzheimer Canada have some stories like that on their website.
And we're currently developing the social media aspect, the Facebook and Twitter that will go with the website. It's not up and running yet, but it is coming soon, and then you will have more types of sharing stories.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for coming today to shed some light on this very important topic. And it was really a pleasure to interview you. And I thank you for coming and appearing on Walking My World.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much
for having us.
You're welcome. We've come to the end of another episode of Walking My World. If you have any comments or questions, you can email me at mike.dell@paulcom.ca. Ona.
More than 14% of all Canadians have a disability. For Aboriginal First Nations people in Canada, there are 33% of people living with disabilities. People living with disabilities are subject to exclusion, poverty, and isolation. There are higher rates of depression, suicide, violence, and abuse for people with disabilities. We know that for Aboriginal people with disabilities in Canada, all of these rates and percentages are even higher. Statistics according to Independent Living Canada.
Kanya ke haga thadi adaras te kayerniga hiadu zewaderoru.